Hello, hello, hello. Hey, Spencer. How are you?
Doing well, Dia. How are you?
I'm well. I'm happy to see you. So glad we get to chat today.
Definitely. Me too. Yeah.
So, tell the people about you. You do so many amazing, wonderful things.
Yeah, well, I do quite a few. I'm a poet, a DJ, a curator for music for certain events and as well as different venues. And yeah, I mean, do most things musically. I'm a vocalist as well too, and play a little bit of bass guitar. Actually, just got a guitar the other day. A buddy of mine gave me one too, so kind of
Ooh,
started into that too.
yes.
So yeah, just all things
Very
music.
nice.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like not everybody knows that you're a vocalist as well.
Mm.
Every once in a while, you'll like bust out with something.
It's on the
And then, like,
rant.
oh, you sing? That's awesome. I love the phrase that you used, that you're a curator of music. Say more.
Well, it's funny. I was on a podcast recently and kind of thought about this concept a few weeks back, but basically, it's kind of like DJing in real life. So selecting
Mm,
bands, booking bands and groups and artists, and
mhm,
kind of bringing them together to create a particular vibe or be um, just enhance a vibe that already is there for whether it's an event or a specific at a venue. So
mhm.
that's kind of the curation side of it. Just like an artist, art curator would pick particular pieces for a gallery exhibition or something of that nature. It's very similar just with musicians. So
And what kind of music are you into? What kind of music do you play
I'm into a
or
lot of different
DJ?
music. So DJing, I'm an open format DJ. So I
Nice.
spin everything from country to metal to hip hop to rock. I mean everything. So and then as far as
Great.
music that I make, um, I mean I was in a hip hop group when I lived in Arizona. So I currently live in Winston-Salem, North
Oh,
Carolina. So there's a hip hop group that I was in called Artificial Christian. Y'all should look them up.
okay, okay.
um,
Didn't know that about you.
yeah, so was doing that, making hip hop. Um, I mean, I think I've tried to dabble in making some house tracks, which has been fun, like producing house tracks, and it's been enjoyable.
Nice.
But I really like singing soul, R&B. Um, those are two styles that I really enjoy. Some gospel. Yeah,
Man, man. I want to put you on the spot and be like freestyle.
yeah,
That sounds
damn.
amazing.
Give me a beat.
I don't know if I can help with that. The beat making, I can't quite say is my forte. Man, well, definitely want to send people to hear your music, but are you DJing anytime soon? What do you
Yeah,
have
I'm
going on that the
actually.
public could access? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I'm DJing today. There's a
of
silent
course. Of
Winston-Salem.
course.
Yeah, I'm at this. I have a residency at a bar in town. It's called Bar Pina. So I'm there just about every
Mm.
Saturday of the month. So I mean, I DJ over there. As far
Well, tell people
as
where that is because not everybody knows where
oh
you're located.
yeah, so I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and that is about an hour and a half north of Charlotte, about an hour and a half west of Durham and Raleigh, and about 2 hours east of Asheville. So I'm kind of
Mhm,
in that kind of central place.
mhm,
And then Barpena is on Trade Street, which is one of the main streets in Winston. It's
mhm.
above a restaurant called the Famous Toastery. So it's kind of a
Mm,
second and third
fancy.
floor rooftop bar. It's kind of interesting because today it's going to rain, or it is raining, and so I'll be set up inside. But it'll still be a fun time. But yeah, it's over in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
What's the scene like out there? Like,
Mm.
what's the vibe?
Yeah, it is. It's a growing vibe, I would say. There's within the past probably 12 years. the city's changed a lot. Downtown, I guess, was a place that you really didn't go. It was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
abandoned or boarded up warehouses, places, and so within the past 12 years, it's kind of grown more into, um, I would say, a more vibrant food community, and then also I would say music community. We have the UNCSA School of the Arts, which is
Mm-hmm.
I would say you call it like I don't know. I heard somebody say I think they said it was like the Juilliard of the South. I don't know Juilliard of the South something
Wow.
something. It's not that.
Okay.
I mean, it's great. It's a great school. It's amazing. It's amazing people come out of it, but partly because of that, and partly because of just North Carolina and its roots in like music. There's a ton of different musicians that have come from North Carolina, but there are several jazz scenes. There are several. I
Mm.
mean, there's a few different DJing scenes. Between here, Greensboro, which is about 30 minutes east of Winston, but there's a lot of live music, and then there's some more like recorded music stuff that happens too. I would say it's not as big as like Austin or some of the other places that are very known for their music scene, but I would say it is a growing musical community. And yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot here. Some of it is kind of underground, and you don't really know about it until you know about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of jazz. There are some different other styles with more like contemporary um, music. Uh, yeah, there's some hip hop. There's a smaller hip hop scene. It's kind of underground here, and then yeah, there's all different kinds of music and styles. So it's here.
I feel like most people aren't aware that North Carolina would have such a strong music scene. Even though
Hmm.
you're saying a lot of people come from there, I don't know that. I've heard a ton of people talk about it.
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
kind of letting the people know.
Ninth Wonder is here. One of the multi, yeah, several awards and everything. But as far as producing, um, there's a
Mm.
lot of. I'm trying to think about different soul artists that have come from here. Um, I can't think of any off the top of my head. They're all in my crate right now. So I mean,
Which amazing. When do you, okay, so this is for the ignorant, those of us who don't know much about DJ. So you say they're in your crate, meaning like you have actual like vinyl records. Is that how
yeah.
you spin, or are you doing things digitally? Like, what's your whole setup like?
So it's a hybrid right now. So I primarily use a program called Serato. Serato enables you to um, kind of use your MP3s, WAV files, and other digital files um, as kind of like well, let me just take this as an example. So grab a record. This is a record. Uh, it's a Jay Dilla record. If you don't know who Jay Dilla is,
Okay.
grab Jay Dilla because Jay Dilla's dope. But Serato would basically, I could take a digital file and spin it on a turntable just like I would a regular record. So they have a time coded record which emits a tone that the program will read, and it simulates like an actual record. So I do use vinyl when I spin. Um, I also can use the digital version of that with the time coded records that still simulate me like scratching a record or like doing everything. So
Ah,
um,
okay.
yeah, so that's what I'm using right now. Two Technique 1200s, a Pioneer mixer, um, and yeah, it's fun and vinyl.
Sounds amazing. Amazing, amazing.
Mhm.
And also, I know that you like collaborating with other artists as well, maybe
Yeah,
in slightly different forms, not just DJing, but can you talk a little bit about that as well?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so with poetry and spoken word, and I guess the hip hop background I really enjoy. I would say the collaborative aspect of having live musicians and spoken word and music. And so
Hmm.
there's been several opportunities here. My birthday, I think last year, there's a live band that was playing, or 2 years ago, live band that was playing behind me. And like I was freestyling with the band and like kind of, you know,
Okay.
emceeing at the same time. So, but that's one of my favorite
Wow.
ways of collaborating is being able to kind of jam out with different people as like with improv, a lot of it. And then actually, I've been doing something more recently, which has been cool. There was an event that I got a chance to DJ for, and they paired me with a um, contemporary
Mm.
dancer, and I was
Mhm.
mixing live like different atmospheric cuts and different parts of songs that could create essentially a live track for her to dance to for this event,
Wow.
which was really fun. And it
Wow.
was that was a really neat collaboration that I was like, oh, I was not expecting this, but this is really fun. So things like that where I can, obviously, you're contributing your artistic
Mhm.
medium or just bent uh, to a
Mhm.
conversation, I would say, like a musical or like artistic conversation, is really that's enjoyable for me for sure.
Man, I am trying to picture you freestyling and mixing at the same time. Just like, how are you doing that? What?
Um, yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
You're like, and by the way, da, 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 da,
Yeah, like
Sounds
literally just like
amazing. That sounds
mm,
amazing.
yeah.
Well, I will say because I haven't heard you freestyle, but I've certainly experienced your spoken word.
Mhm,
And so Spencer and I met through the Brum Center, connected to Fuller Seminary, and I've had a chance to listen to just some of his beautiful, beautiful spoken word, and it's so powerful and enriching and moving. And so I'm just imagining how you couple music with that, if you couple music with that. But that's been my sort of foray into your work,
mhm,
yeah, it's been amazing just to get to experience a little bit of the atmospheres that you create when you're speaking, when you're performing, when
mhm.
you're sharing music as well. Yeah, it's pretty powerful. Yeah,
Thanks, dear.
yeah, for sure. One thing that you mentioned earlier about the scene that you're in, I found really interesting. It's just this idea of how, say, a place is like run down or, not really populated. It's interesting how one of the first things that a city might bring in would be the arts,
Mhm,
whether it be music or if they want to do like galleries or something. But I think that people sometimes underestimate the power of art to galvanize people and the power of art to bring life to a community. Do you have any
mhm.
thoughts on that? Especially as a
Yeah,
DJ and as a musician, like your whole thing is about like moving bodies of people through sound and I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah. I mean, art has a way of. I was just talking about this with a friend, but disarming people, right? And so
Mm,
creating space for people to be um, vulnerable and like have a response that they maybe wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. And so in terms of like
mhm,
how does that affect like a city or a scene or something that's going on, that it gives, I think it gives context for people to have some commonality, and just kind of really just be brought together, um,
mm,
without it having to, sometimes it can be charged, but I would say for the most part, it gives people an opportunity to do it in a non-threatening environment and be able to
mm,
kind of bridge some of those gaps that you wouldn't normally, maybe if you were just having a regular conversation with somebody, it might not necessarily, be communicated the same way. And so it kind
mhm,
of opens up for a lot more perspectives, but it also gives, rise for more bridges to be built in that. So, and it changes things. I mean, if you like the other day, I was in a restaurant and the music stopped for a little bit. And I was just sitting
mm,
there and I was like, listening, this conversation's going on. And I was like, huh, there's a very different, like you could feel something was missing. Something like
mm,
it wasn't the same vibe. It wasn't the same like atmosphere than when you walked in. And then when the musician started playing again, it was like, oh, this is
mhm,
like your attention is now refocused. You have a different, way of approaching the situation. Maybe in the conversation that people got louder a little bit, things started to become more
mm,
vibrant and kind of expressive. And it not only adds something to it, but I think it gives a foundation for people to really, you know, kind of be expressive and express more because of it. And so that's
mm.
huge.
Have you ever had a moment? maybe either when you're performing like spoken word or DJing where you feel like almost tangible shift in the atmosphere
Mhm,
based off of like the audience. You know what I mean by that? Like,
mhm,
you know what I mean by that?
mhm,
Could you share a little bit about that? Because I'm like trying to tease out the essence of how to verbalize that, but
mhm.
share a little bit about that.
Yeah, if I'm understanding correctly, so there's a, I mean, DJing in a bar kind of does that in some ways. Because you have different crowds of people that come in at different times, and you have
Mm-hmm.
no idea who's necessarily going to walk in. So
Mm-hmm.
there
Mm-hmm.
might be somebody who's there celebrating a birthday, and they have 15 friends with them, and they're just amped. They're just going, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
wow. And then it's like that whole crew can walk out the door, and you have like a bunch of people that maybe just got done with a conference or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
they're just coming in to enjoy a drink or something or eat something, and they just have a very different demeanor. And so, like, the energy that people walk in the room with obviously is going to be one thing that you can really tangibly feel. But even when I'm like in the middle of a set too, a particular song might could like change somebody's their whole,
Mm-hmm.
or even just the whole dance floor, or whomever's there listening could just change their whole trajectory and what they're doing. And so I see it in that way of like there's I don't know what I'm trying to say. There's a like the people that are coming into the space can make that shift, or that shift can happen with that based on how they're walking in, or like what they're bringing with them. Then also I would say the music itself can really also evoke that shift in ways that change people's whole thing. I could go from like something playing some Afrobeat, something that's
Mm-hmm.
in that vein, and then all of a sudden like fade it and then come in with like a classic hip hop track, and it be something that's very different in terms of
Mm-hmm.
rhythm, in terms of like sound, in terms of just overall vibe, and that they people will respond differently. Like somebody be like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is crazy," and just that might just shift the whole the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I've heard you use really interesting phrases like what people bring with them or shifting like the scene or the atmosphere. And I feel as though musicians in particular, we're talking about artists in general, but I always think this like about musicians in particular. I feel like you have to have a sort of sensitivity to not just the room, but
Mhm.
for a sensitivity to environment, to mood, and it's very subtle. You know, I'm always really intrigued by how musicians are able to kind of have that sort of inner ear, if you will. So yes, you can listen and you hear what you're playing, but there's something happening beneath the surface that I'm always really fascinated by. And I feel like musicians have a way of understanding how to listen deeply and intently to something that's happening below the surface, and then being able to utilize that to redirect that, to shift that. You know, I think it's an incredible gift. Like you and I have had conversations about listening like in a spiritual sense as well, and to me I kind of imagine it on that same level, that same sort of plane. Usually when you're talking about like a spiritual journey, something like prayer or whatever it might be, the intent is like a deeper sort of listening, and I feel as though musicians are hovering within that same vibration, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, just listening to the thoughts that you were sharing there, and that came to mind. Yeah. What about your sensitivity as a musician or as a DJ, as a performer? Like, how have you cultivated that, or is it just something that is innate within who you are? You know, or are you
Mhm.
just born like that?
Well, I definitely have, I would say, become more sensitive over time.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, the Lord has done a lot to raise my
Mm-hmm.
awareness
As the Lord
about.
does.
Yes, yes, indeed. But yeah, just raising my awareness about where, like, trying to meet people where they're at. Um,
Hmm.
Having a lot of reps in, like, specifically, I'm speaking a lot about DJing because that's what I do primarily. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I would even say just, so yesterday I was emceeing an event, and I ask a series of questions at the end of the set of each individual artist. or group. And, there's certain questions that kind of get to the heart of their, why they're doing what they're doing. But it also, leaves space for them to have this moment of vulnerability with the audience and like with the
Mm,
people who are coming to see them. I think like years ago, I wouldn't necessarily have asked the same questions. I think over
mm,
time it's come to, when I ask them like what's one high or what's one low that you're experiencing as an artist or as a person that you feel comfortable enough to share with this group. And then like how do we as a community support you, through that? It's like I don't know if I would have had the same maybe lens to be able to notice that like the artists and the musicians often are up there and they're doing their thing. And sometimes they have moments where they can, talk about the different music and the songs that they're doing. But there's not a whole lot of space for them to have the moments of vulnerability of saying
mm,
like this is what's happening right now, not just when I made the song, but like here's where I'm at right in this moment. And so I think over time that's definitely been developed. Um, but I mean it's a relational thing. And so I think as I'm growing and developing relationships too, that kind of ties into how do I how does that carry over into being sensitive as a DJ or being sensitive as an MC or trying to what's the right song to pick right now for what's happening or
mm.
for what's what somebody might be experiencing. So yeah.
What comes to mind as you're speaking is a word that is relatively overused these days, but I think of the word hospitality
Mm,
and how it's like what you're doing is really making a, if you want to use the word safe space, but we can bypass that and just say you're making a space hospitable to the artist, hospitable to the audience or the group that's participating in what's happening in the scene. And I don't know that I've ever really thought about DJing in that way.
mm,
But now that I think about it, if I go into a room or I go into a party, whatever it might be, and the DJ is there, it's really the DJ guiding the adventure, if you will,
mm,
guiding my experience with the music and when I'm ready to like get up and dance or giving me a moment to rest and chill. This is me as a participant, but also what you said about asking artists like what's going on with them,
mm,
what's a high or low happening on your journey right now as well. I don't know that there are a lot of spaces that nurture performers in that way,
mm,
especially not in the moment. It's
mm,
always about perform for us, give us more, give us what you got, let us have some of you. But at what point in time do artists actually get a chance to kind of rest in the moment as well? And to
mm,
show that there's much more to them than just the performance. I think sometimes people can get quite enamored with performers in general and with the performances, but to remember the people behind the works,
mm,
I think it's
yeah.
an incredible act. I'm curious about how your vulnerability was developed, like what happened to get you to the place where you were willing to ask those sort of questions of the artists themselves.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has happened just over time. I've gone through a lot of hard things in life, and
Mm-hmm.
that does shape you. It does. There were moments where I didn't have maybe the space to be vulnerable, and I was just kind of like going through life or just kind of accepting everyone's opinion of how or what I needed to do, and not really having
Mm-hmm.
the space to be able to express my own opinion, my own stuff. And so seeing the value of that and how that has helped, I think, me in some ways, but also just others, like that that has kind of given that space. And I was with a person for a long time, even growing up, that people would just kind of dump all of their stuff on. They would just People would meet me for the first time, tell me their whole life story and like
Mm-hmm.
everything that was happening with them. And I real like just over time, like you just realize like there's just not a lot of places where people feel like some people just do that with a lot of people just because they just need to get it out. But I
Mm-hmm.
think there's not a lot of places where people feel that type of space to be able to do that and creating that and cultivating that, not just as like a, in some of the other spaces that we're in our day to day, but especially as like as artists, like having that is so crucial to being able to say like, yo, I'm wrestling and there's a lot of stuff coming from this and it's great, it looks great, but I'm having a hard time. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, if you don't really have anywhere to communicate that, there's a lot of like just outcomes that are not like over time with artists, with people, where it's like they haven't had that room and that space to express that. And that's, that's led them to make, really tragic decisions and other things too. And it's
Mhm.
like, I feel like if we have that empathy for people and provide that space in that context, that really does, that can make a huge impact on their, on them as a person,
Mhm.
on whoever's in the room, or just like also whatever's, being birthed out of them in terms of art and other things. And so I would say to answer your question, sorry, that was a long way of saying it's come from, I
Great.
think, through a lot of the personal things that I've experienced and not having space to do that and wanting and desiring to see that occur more and realizing that I could be somebody who could provide that and, be a catalyst in that. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
A couple of things come to mind. Hope I can remember them all. But um, this I find it really ironic because a lot of artists will try to process difficulties that they're experiencing through their art, right? Like that's one of the gifts of being an artist is that you have a channel or a platform to kind of work through and wrestle with some of the difficulties that you're facing or that
Mhm.
you're observing in a different context or within society, whatever it may be. Um, but the irony that I find is that after the wrestling, after the work has been created, and once artists begin to share, the sort of public reaction to the artist is not necessarily on the same level as what the work may be about.
Mhm.
And there's this sort of almost expectation that artists should be excited and should be animated and should be lively all the time as though they aren't actually
Mhm.
going through anything. People are, oh, you make art and you did this artistic thing, and it's an exciting thing for those experiencing it without necessarily realizing that costs quite a bit probably for the artist to actually be able to put something like that out, and that it didn't come out of nowhere, especially if it's a piece that wrestles with really difficult material. It wasn't just that they were thinking of these things, they were probably feeling quite a bit as well and going through something. And it was
Mhm.
probably quite a journey to actually get the work out in the first place. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes people don't always realize what artists carry, you know. And hearing you talk about how people just like share so much with you, right? I do believe that has something to do with the artistic characteristic of being an empath. A lot of us artists are empaths because part of what we do in order to make the art is to be able to like feel deeply, be able to
Mhm.
sense the room that we're in and pick up on the subtleties that are present within the room.
Mhm.
But that sort of openness doesn't always have you have to learn, for me, and I'll speak for myself, you have to learn how to put up the right sort of barriers,
Mhm.
at the right time so that you're open when you need to be open and also you're protective when you need to be protective. It's not to
Mhm.
shut out anything or anyone, but it's just to be mindful of, oh, I can't hold everything all at once. But it is a gift also to be able to connect with people on a deep level. And I think when people do just sort of unload on you, it's probably because they're picking up on the fact that you live on a different level.
Mhm.
You exist on a plane that is a little bit deeper than the surface. And I think people pick up on that naturally.
Mhm.
And there was a third point that I had, but it flittered away. And now I can't remember it. That's okay though.
Mhm.
It was something about art and society and just kind of pick up on what you were talking about, but that's okay. No worries. This is a good segue because I do want to chat with you about the Black Halos EP as well. I think it's so fun that I get to chat with you, someone who is so in tune with music. Like this was one of the first musical projects I've ever done, and I still know very little about the world, but it's something that I have been hungry to do. It's just what you've been saying. Music is uh, it's on a different kind of plane. There's something about visual art can definitely have a very like visceral impact on someone, but
Mhm.
nothing shifts someone's mood
Mhm.
like music.
Mm,
right? Like nothing gets you to kind of sit within a different kind of atmosphere like sound.
mhm.
And so I think it's so exciting to get to talk to you about sound and about music and about the musicality of the Black Halos EP. We're specifically going to talk about Collective Conscience, but I just want to hear your thoughts overall. Like, what were you hearing as you were listening to the EP?
And I was hearing parts of my story.
Mm,
I was just like,
yeah.
wow, this is, you know, using words often for like my job or like for doing poetry and emceeing, and then hearing someone else's words that very succinctly describe my experiences was just like it was so refreshing, and it just helped me to kind of like be, you know, like the melodics were wonderful. Like I was sitting there and I'm just rocking back and forth,
Mm,
with the movement of each song, with each transition within each song, and just yeah, it was. I mean, it was so. It reminded me kind of in some ways, and like how in like a classical piece they have all these reintroductions of some of the same
mm,
like phrasing at different
mm,
points and like in different movements, and that like it's reintroduced, maybe not exactly the same way, but it's very much like an expression of that melody or that part, and just like hearing parts about you know the black experience, like like what I live was just like, oh
mm,
man, and just coming up in all these different ways and different like pieces. And I think to your point of what you were saying earlier is like there's so much that goes into a particular project or performance or whatever. And like I was reflecting, I was like, wow, I was like, Dia, there's a lot here that you're exploring and that you're reflecting on, from, not only from like things that are going on in the country, but even just like personal things that are like,
mhm.
there's lines throughout. I didn't write them all down. I wish I would have written all of them down. I'm gonna go back and I will write them down. But specifically, yeah, like even in collective consciousness, like the register, like opening the register of our dreams, and our spells change, none of the change, and it's just
Mhm,
like, man, like it's a, you know, I I don't know, it hit me in ways where I was not expecting, but I was
mm,
extremely happy that it did. Um,
mm,
from the metaphors to the way that the melodics were, to the way that the sound was shifting in the space and how I was listening to it and where I was sitting. And so I was impressed, and I also was, you know, I was reflective and contemplative about what was going on in me. And I know when art
mm,
does that to me, I'm like, if it pushes me to reflect and think about what's happening inside of me, it's doing something that's like, you know, it's a catalyst for helping me understand something different about the world, something different about you, and I think something different about myself. And like that's exactly what is beautiful, and like um yeah, for me, just different about how art can change change me. So yeah,
mhm,
that's
mhm.
huge.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Like, it means so much coming from you because you live music, right? You live in that world. You live within it. Um, you know, getting to work with Alan Hampton, the producer, on this was just such an incredible experience, just because he just has a way of uh, just birthing these sonic worlds, and then inviting the listener to come into the world in a very, again, this word hospitable way.
Mhm.
I love his sort of gentle approach. He doesn't necessarily slam you over the head with anything, but what he's doing is quite complex. And so once you enter into the world of one of the songs, you are invited to kind of listen again, listen again, listen again, because each thing that's happening is like on a level that's just below what you just heard on the surface, and then just below that, and then just below that. And there are all these little moments, you know, especially in collective conscience, because they're like four major moments happening right within the whole piece, but each one is so incredibly multifaceted and multi-layered. And you listen, and then you listen again, then you listen again, and each time you're hearing something slightly different. And it was just, it's really quite a gift to get to hear what he created. But to your point about, you know, the words and hearing parts of your story, like that is actually the point for me. Um, you know, even here, like on this podcast, like it's not for me, I'm not really just trying to promote like the EP. It's about wanting to have these conversations about what's happening within the pieces. Like they were created for a reason with intentionality, you know, and it's not just, oh, we want to do this music project. Actually, what we want to do is reflect the stories. What we want to do is to talk about what's happening on a social level and to give people space to kind of sit within some of those more difficult topics and some of the ickier parts of our stories, right? And you were talking about this earlier about how music can create a space for people to kind of grapple with things that they maybe otherwise wouldn't necessarily confront, or get to experience things or emote in a sort of way that they normally wouldn't have a chance to do. And that's exactly it with this project. The hope is that things that are difficult, things that we get tired of talking about, issues that we really don't want to face over and over again, but we have to if we're going to have any kind of collective healing. Just offering another platform, another moment for people to kind of pause and listen, reflect, see what's coming up for them within themselves, to think about our country, you know, to think about the particular neighborhood that they're living in. Like that's the hope for it, you know. Um, Mark Fields is the spoken word artist that you heard in the beginning of the piece, and he just has this really incredible, rich voice, you know, that helps you to kind of sit in the space. And I love the way he performed the piece because, and I mean, as a spoken word artist, like, you know, all about the use of tonality and the use
Mhm.
of pacing, right? And I love that he had this sort of tonal quality to his voice that made it feel as though something was slightly off edge. You know, his voice is very intriguing. It's very warm. It'll pull you in, but then as you're listening, it gives you the sense of like, oh, something's slightly askew here. You know, I love that little slight little shift. It's not over the top or anything, but it's just really subtle where you feel like slightly off kilter, you know? Yeah. But let's talk a little bit more about collective conscious in particular. Like I said, there are four sort of movements happening. We have Mark's spoken word section, and then I'm sing lyrics that he just performed. And then we go into this sort of musical dip, you know, and then the final with the echoing, you know.
Yeah.
Was there a particular section that stood out to you, or any one of those movements, or maybe the connections between those movements that stood out to you? Always curious about like your musical ear, like what you're picking up on.
I definitely loved the way that it was like a reinvention of the original like words, and that was
Mhm,
like the expression of it. It was re-expressed differently and re-expressed differently, and like
mhm,
and so from the first part from when he read it to when you sang it to like you're saying the echoing at the end and like that middle that third section too with that dip.
mhm,
I mean, it gave me
mhm.
like a lot of just like I was like, oh, I gotta still wrestle with this right here, but in a very different.
Not done yet?
I was like, no, in like in a great way of just like this
Mhm,
is actually that to what you know your words earlier. This is the hospitable space for me to sit with this and like more internalize what that is doing to me. And then the last part coming, um, yeah, to the point where you were doing the echoing and just like I'm hearing it again. It's in a round. It's in a round. It's in a round. It's swirling. It is coming. It's like so that was. I mean, the way that y'all structured that, or the way that you structured that, was phenomenal. I love that, and it actually mimics it in a lot of ways. I think the rise and fall and kind of coming back up of a wave of sound. I mean, it is a sound wave,
mhm,
and like that's the structure of a lot of the things I do. My sets with DJing too is like there are peaks and there are valleys, but you those are all very important in being able to create an experience all the way around that helps you to, you know, express from everything from high to low, through that. So I really appreciated that so much. And your voice is great. I love it. I was like, oh, let me do you sing. Okay.
I'm like you, I keep it on the sly. Just bust it out
Yeah.
every once in a while.
No, I was very, very pleased. I was like, nice. I was like, this is very nice. So
I
thank you for that.
appreciate that. I
Hmm.
appreciate that. Yeah, that the structure of the sound is all Alan. I brought to him pieces of things, I had the words, I had sort of like melodies, but nothing was like a chorus, verse, chorus, that kind of thing. It was
Hmm.
like I have these little pieces. What can we do with it? And he just built these really beautiful sonic worlds around that and kind of teased it apart. But I think the brilliance of what he did with collective conscience in particular is exactly what you're talking about. It's the story, right? Like that art that you're talking about is the story of the piece. But I also I envision it as in a sense a metaphor as well to how we, in the United States of America deal with matters of race and identity. I think it is quite cyclical, and I feel as though, um, 2020 was a huge eruption of things. And it was almost like the pinnacle of what had been building up for a while. And now you sort of see this sort of light sort of fluttering. People aren't talking about it as much, but it's still on people's minds. But, it's just kind of slightly to the side, but not really, a little bit. And I feel as though we kind of go in this cycle of a major push, hit a pinnacle, things slowly start to quiet down. People kind of forget there's a problem. And then you see these sort of systemic failures begin to build up again. And then people are like, wait, 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 this is the problem. And it just keeps going and going and going. On one hand, I feel as though that's the healing cycle. You have to go through the ebbs and flows, to use your phrasing, in order to get to a place of wholeness. So, on one hand, that's just the reality of it. But on the other hand, I think there's also something quite sinister to a point where we really have to build up the muscle and the capacity to be diligent about watching systems try to regroup or try to change their faces,
Yeah.
change the way it looks, but on like beneath the surface, it's actually the same issue. I think we have to build up the capacity to be very vigilant, and that doesn't mean always looking for the negative. It just means keeping the reins tight enough to continue to steer, so that if it seems as though we're beginning to kind of head back into forms of um, bigotry, racism, and not just on like an individual level, but systemically. I think it's really important to keep it at the forefront. Um, and that's really why I'm glad we released the EP this year and not in 2020 when it was fresh on everybody's minds, because this is just like another little nugget and reminder, hey, we still have work to do. We still need to continue to talk about these things. We still need to seek our collective healing, you know. And so when you were talking about the ebbs and flow of the piece, to me, I see it also as our sort of collective story around these like really deep themes that are hard to wrestle with. They're hard to grapple with. Yeah. So, do you have any other thoughts that you could share with the people before we wrap up?
I mean, I'm looking forward to the next project as well. There are so many things that you, I mean, I specifically want to spend a lot more time with. Like I spent time listening to it. I listened to it a few times through. Um, but yes, I know that there is so much to say. And I think the ways that you are saying what you're saying here, in this particular project, are, I know you're just scratching the surface. And I think it is so, I'm like, okay, dear, all right, I see, I see. Um, and so I know you're doing a lot of generative things with I think all the artistic mediums that you're in, and it's encouraging to see, like, to hear the conversations that we have had, and also to see, and hear this particular project and being like, wow, okay, like those same thematics, a lot of those same things that we've wrestled with in other conversations and had over here. I mean, it's directly coming out here, and it's not just obviously it's not just for consumption, but it is also for the, you're calling people to action through it. And I think
Mhm.
that's, I'm looking forward to what continual things you have that keep calling people to action, um,
Mhm.
through music and through everything that you're doing. So thank you. I think that's what I was saying. I was like, dear, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for putting this together, for inspiring me, through this too. And, as somebody who's an artist as well, like it's encouraging to see, you know, work that is, public facing, that I can appreciate in those ways too, and also be able to hear and listen and see how that has been impacting you. So thank you for putting that out.
Thank you for your words. I'm going to exercise a new muscle I'm trying to develop, which is to sit in the compliment, take it in, soak it in, say thank you before I say what I was about to say. Thank you for your words. They're very encouraging, and I value your ear. I value your taste. I value your creative skill, and so it means a lot coming from you. Um, Now that I've done that, what I want to say is that I see you as well, and I love how multifaceted your practice is. I know that you primarily focus on music overall, but really what I think of is you utilize rhythm, you utilize sound. So it's more than just music, it's also the tonation of your voice, it's how you deliver your spoken word pieces. It's also your presence. Spencer, you have a very um, you have that kind of presence that can open up spaces, and without you having to perform or do anything. It's you walk into a room, and it's as though you are inviting people to step into something deeper and something colorful and something vibrant, and that's just you being you. And I also want to say thank you, because I've had a chance to get to experience your light in that way. And I also really appreciate how generous you are with your creative gifts, extending them out into the world in so many different formats, and collaborating with people, and continuing to make spaces where people can just jive and dance and move, and have a good time, but then also come into a space where people can get still, listen to the words that you're saying. I feel like you do both very, very well. You enliven a space, but you also bring people into a space where they can settle down, listen, hear the words that are coming out of your mouth, hear your stories, be invited to share their own stories, be encouraged by how you're sharing your stories and inspired by it. So, all that to say that I see you as well, and I'm also excited about what you're doing. I feel like there's so much happening, and I know you've been doing more traveling gigs, and I'm just praying that God would open up so many more doors, for people to get to experience God's presence really through you and how you move and how you share sound and how you share music. I think that it's, I think that you're working on a level that's far beyond just the surface. You're touching things that are very deep within people, and you're moving communities of people, to get to experience a sense of being alive. That's the word that comes to my mind. You enliven people in many different ways, whether it be through energetic vibrancy or through stirring something deep within their souls that maybe they haven't touched on in a while. So I'm equally excited to see what you're creating and what you're going to produce and just share. It's a gift to get to witness. So thank you as well.
Thanks.
I appreciate you being here with me. I appreciate you taking the time to chat. I am so glad we get to hear your thoughts, and I look forward to more. Oh, one other thing. Where can people find out about you? How can they hear your music? How can they catch up with you?
There is, so right now, I don't have social media, so that's one thing, which is very interesting. It's a whole nother conversation. But there's this thing
All
called
good.
Hyper. Yeah, there's this thing called Hyperfollow. It's put out by DistroKid, but hyperfollow.com slash what is that, backslash PSEDEKOT. So that would be the best way. It's got some interviews on there. It has some of the songs that we put out through Artificial Christian. It also has a link to a website that I'm still working on. So um, yeah, so that's probably the best way to find out where everything is. Yeah.
Sounds good. We'll definitely include a link whenever we share this episode. We'll definitely include a link for sure.
Awesome.
Spencer, you're amazing. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you so much. Thank you, thank you.
Anytime. Thank you for having me, and yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything that you're sharing.